welcome to Pixel Stories. In this video, I'm going to show you the 4 steps I follow whenever I edit my landscape images. You can use this process to edit your images as well. Doesn't matter if it is a portrait or landscape, these steps can be followed. 1. Composition. In this step, I make sure the horizons are right, and I also make sure the image that I'm processing is compositionally right. It either follows rule of third or golden ratio or diagonal lines, leading lines, any of the composition rules. Step 2 is making sure I have the right colors. In this step, I make sure the white balance is set right. I make sure I have enough saturation and vibrance in the image. Step 3 is adding contrast. In this step, I make sure highlights and shadows are prominent in the image. This means there is a good contrast in the image, not just by light, not just highlights and shadows, but also, if possible, adding the contrast of colors. It can be adding warm and cool tones in the frame, but adding that harmonious contrast through colors is the third step. Once I have added contrast, the last step is adding depth to that image. The depth can be added through sharpness or the clarity on that image, or by adding contrast of the highlights and shadows. So those are the 4 steps, and I will be using this particular image to walk you through those 4 steps. So let's just jump right in. Step 1 is composition. So I'm going to use a crop tool to crop the top part of it. This was the early morning, so you can see the sunrise happening. At that point of time, the color contrast looked really good, but at this moment I don't feel like having it. So I'm just going to crop that out. I'm just going to keep original ratio, and I'm going to crop it out like this. Slightly like this, so that the frame only has these layers of mountains with the highlights and shadows. Now that image looks much better than our starting point. So that's step 1, making sure the composition is right, and you crop it to that level that whatever you want to showcase stands out in the image. Step 2 is making colors are right. So before I jump into colors, there is one thing that I make sure is I make sure I have all the data I need to work with. So I increase my shadows and decrease my highlights. So this brings all the details in the image. And once I'm done with it, I make sure the white balance is set right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select the white balance tool, and I'm going to look for a white spot, a generic white spot. So probably this highlights point could be one. This could be a spot. So I'm just going to select that and zoom out to see what is the before and after color. It looks little warm, so I'm just going to reduce the temperature a little bit. So I'm going to keep it to around 6000, 6500, 400. Good. Once I have this, I'm going to increase the exposure a bit and add black points and a little bit of brightness. The vibrance to 100%, so whatever the maximum possible, and adjust my saturation to the taste. I don't want to saturate it to the core so that the image looks like some HDR image that you see on online, but I'm just going to keep it slightly mildly where you can see the colors, but it is not overpowering that image. So that's a step 2, making sure the colors are brought up. So right now we have all the details on the shadows, and also we have the colors from the highlights as well. So Once we are done with it, I'm going to add contrast because currently the image looks very dull and flat. So the next step is making sure you have the contrast. So I'm going to add contrast here, and here I'm going to go to curves. Curves is one tool that you have to get familiar with, and it's going to be handy in many situations. If you have to bring details or if you have to bring contrast to that image, there is a simple curve formula that we will use, like just up the highlights, down the shadows, and automatically the contrast gets created. So that's pretty much what we're going to do as well. So in this graph, this top part is highlights and the bottom part is shadows. So whatever you edit here, let me put a mid-tone here, so that like anything that you adjust here gonna affect the highlights of that image. You can see it affects the highlights of that image, and whatever I do here, it affects the shadow of the image. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring the shadows a little down, and I'm going to increase the highlights a tad bit. You can see before and after here. I'm going to disable the curves here. You can see how flat it is, and you can see how the layers got created. So this is just by bringing the contrast in that image. And I'm going to add another contrast using split toning. In the split toning, I'm going to add color contrast. In the mist, you can already see a warm tone here. That means the morning light is already started to come up. So you can see a little warm light there. So I'm going to keep orangish yellow to be on the highlights. So I'm just going to increase it a bit so that the warm tones kind of pops up. And in the shadows, I'm going to use teal and blue. When I just increase it, you can just see how the colors kind of stands out compared to elevation. So this is after first 3 steps of that image. Step 1, making sure the composition is right. Step 2, making sure you have the colors right. Step 3, add contrast to that image. And within these 3 steps, you can see the before and after. So this is the before image. You can see how blue and kind of it has violet and pink tones, everything there. Whereas after, you can see the actual colors of the landscape pops out. So that's before and after. After this step, I'm going to take it to photo persona, and then I'm going to add depth to that image. Before jumping into the step 4 of this process, let's just look at this image first. So this is just a gray box. So without any variation, it's just a flat gray box, right? A hexagon shape. Imagine you getting a light from here. Let's say you getting a light from this angle, right? That means this top portion will be bright because the light will be directly falling in. So this will be more bright. And this is closer to that light, but it is not directly facing the light. So this will be less bright. Whereas this part is completely against the light, so this will be much dark. Now you can see a 3D object instead of just a shape, right? So in any image, the depth is created by how bright the highlights are and how dark the shadows are, and that creates the depth. Now let's move on to the image here. So even here, the depth of that image is going to be brought down by how bright the highlight spots are, which is pretty much the mist that's flowing through, and how dark the shadows are, which is the mountain ranges and shapes. And that gives us the 3D layer effect. So before that, let me just add a little sharpness to that image so that the sharp points are a little prominent. So I'm just going to keep it to 1.9. So you can see the middle layers and the front layers are getting a little sharper. Just going to keep it to overlay, and that's pretty much it. This is very subtle effect. You don't even realize it's sharp. But when you zoom closer, and you can see there is a slight pop-up that's happening, right? And that makes a huge impact in the final output. So once I have added the high pass, and I'm gonna add a layer, and I'm gonna fill this layer with 50% gray, and I'm gonna make it to overlay blend mode. This has zero impact on the layer. You can see I'm enabling and disabling. It makes no impact on the layers. But when I select a brush and select black, and if I paint over this image, you can see it darkens that image. And if I select white and then paint, it brightens that image. So that's pretty much what we're going to do on the next step. So let's just create the gray layer again. 50% gray, fill this layer, convert into overlay, and then I'm going to select the brush. Obviously I'm not going to keep the opacity of 100%. I'm going to keep it like 7 to 8%. Yeah. So this gives me an option to gradually increase the brightness that I want to. First I'm going to select the white, and I'm going to slowly brush over the highlight points. So it just kind of starts to pop up. And in landscape post-processing, this is going to be the tedious process if you want to do it. The quality of the output is going to be based on how specifically that you are highlighting this image. I'm going to make the brush small and zoom the image, and then I'm slowly going to brush over the highlight points only. Okay, and I'm going to be doing it for across the frame, across the image, so it's going to take a lot of time. So I'm just going to fast forward it here so you guys can join me once I'm done with it. Okay, once I'm done with the highlights, I'm going to move on to shadows. So I'm going to select black, and I'm going to do the exact same thing for wherever the shadows are. So that's pretty much it. So you can see if I just disable this layer, you can see how that one layer makes a huge difference in that frame. Right? So that's why this much effort is required for that one single adjustment. And having that one adjustment gives that depth to that image. So what I'm showing here is the beginner level adjustments for the depth, just using a gray layer and then using black and white colors to dodge and burn the image, and that adds the depth to that image. You can clearly see how that image just pops up when you enable that layer. So that's the 4 steps that I follow whenever I edit my images. Step 1, composition, where I make sure the horizons are straight and it meets a composition rule. The subject, whatever I want to showcase, is prominent. Step 2 is color. Here I adjust the white balance and I add enough vibrance and saturation that is required. Step 3, contrast. Here I adjust the basic highlights and shadows to add contrast in that image. If required, I also add split toning to add a color contrast as well. Once I'm done with it, the step 4 is adding depth to that image. On that, step 1 is adding clarity to that image, making sure which are the focus point that are sharper. That's by default creates a depth in that image. And second is dodging and burning. Using this dodging and burning, you give a punch to both highlights and shadows, and that gives the layer effect on that frame. I hope this video was helpful. If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm going to be posting more photography related videos. So if you're into photography, make sure you click the bell button as well when you subscribe so that you can keep updated to the new videos. Thank you.